All right. Hey, good afternoon, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Wednesday, November 6th, 2024. This is your afternoon tropical update. We are still tracking what is now Hurricane Rafael. It has made landfall today in western Cuba, currently over land, moving to the northwest. We've had some pretty significant forecast changes with Rafael and no longer appears to be a major threat to the U.S., so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it today, but we will cover the latest on Rafael. And we're also going to talk about the rest of a busy Atlantic basin for the month of November. We have two other areas of interest, one moving towards the northern Antilles and another one back out here. That's all kind of moving this direction. Two other areas to talk about after Rafael. So let's go ahead and take a look at the National Hurricane Center this afternoon. This is the 4 p.m. Hurricane Rafael forecast cone. Maximum sustained winds 115 miles an hour. Rafael did make it to major hurricane status before landfall via the Air Force Reserve and NOAA hurricane hunters. The movement to the northwest at 13 miles per hour. It is the first, I think, major hurricane strike on Cuba since, I think, 2000 or like the early 2000s. I'm not sure which exact year I saw, but it is definitely the first time in a while that a hurricane has made landfall in Cuba. Or major hurricanes made landfall in the month of November in Cuba. This is not unheard of. I know Cuba took a Category 5 back in the 1930s in November, and there have been a couple other notes of history through there, but it is rare to see a storm this strong this time of year. But Rafael had a pretty nice environment and good outflow and was able to take advantage of it over the last 24 hours and really went for it before it made landfall. But it's over land temporarily. And for the U.S., the biggest rub is going to be in the next about 12 hours or so as it moves past the Florida Keys. The Florida Keys remain under a tropical storm warning from the Channel 5 bridge southward, including the dry Tortugas, where tropical storm conditions are possible tonight and early tomorrow. Taking a look at the zoomed-in satellite, our Florida Keys here just off to the north. Rafael centered here just over western Cuba. So that's the eye of Rafael, and we have a little bit of radar coverage from the Key West radar. And the thing to watch over the next day or so for the Keys, or not next day, next 12 hours, is going to be these stronger thunderstorms that move northward. These are going to be really squally, fast-moving bands that have the potential to produce heavy downpours and strong gusty winds, and also the potential for waterspouts and or tornadoes across the Keys. So definitely a couple things to be looking out for this evening, but these are going to be glancing blows where you're going to have a band move through and then it's going to stop, then another band moves through and then it's going to stop. This won't be a constant event, but it will be something the Keys have to deal with tonight and early tomorrow before Rafael moves away. Now, looking at the future of Rafael, the cone has shifted quite a bit. We no longer expect this to move northward into the northern Gulf and potentially threaten the upper Gulf Coast. Yesterday, we talked about the potential for Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. That's off the table. The European solution won. The Euro finally got one on the board. It's been almost the whole season, but the Euro is finally on the board with a score. The Euro was right. The ridge that's guiding this is much stronger than it looked initially. And the storm is no longer expected to be able to gain much more latitude once it leaves Cuba. So we're expecting a pretty sharp bend back to the west and then a slowdown as the steering currents just kind of lazily push it into the Gulf of Mexico. This should induce some pretty steady weakening, but it will not probably be ripped to shreds like we thought because it was coming so much further north. The Euro and GFS models show this well, and the differences that still remain because it depends how much latitude our storm gains. Notice here on Tropical Tidbits in the European model output, valid on early Saturday, that the storm is pretty far south. If I drew a line across from the center, it would barely get past Cuba from the center line. Now, if I show you the GFS, this is center lined north of the Keys into southern Florida. So notice there's quite a bit of difference on the models right here about how far north they are valid just about the same time. So this is because the further north the storm comes, the more wind shear will affect it. European showing the wind shear. Notice these light blues is where the wind shear really picks up. Storm is too far south, doesn't really feel the stronger wind shear. On the GFS, the storm is further north. It is partially in that wind shear, and it is much weaker. And then if I run these models out, they just get weaker from there, while the Euro pretty much holds its intensity into next week. So there is a difference in what's going to ultimately happen with Rafael. We're not 100% sure yet. It could go down towards Mexico. I think the coastline of Mexico's Gulf Coast should be watching this carefully. It could keep drifting southward. It could bend a little sharper to the south, and it could eventually try to work back to the north. Now, I think any attempt to work northward would pretty much be thwarted by another cold front coming in the middle of this week. It would likely rip apart whatever was left of Rafael at that point, and we'll be expecting a much weaker storm anyway by that point. So again, not a serious threat to the U.S. anymore. Could still bring some low-end tropical storm impacts to somebody next week, but it's not something we're going to cover daily on the page, at least on YouTube anymore. I'll probably have regular updates on the Facebook page, but this is probably the last serious update on Rafael, since it no longer appears to be a major threat to the U.S. So taking a look at the rest of the tropics tonight, what are the other things we're going to be watching? Well, we do have another area to watch this weekend, and then we have something to watch into next week. The weekend area is this trough of low pressure that's developing north of the Antilles. This is off the tail end of a cold frontal boundary. You see a big cold front stretched out across the Atlantic basin. You get divergence tail into that front. You have low pressure developing, very common meteorological rule. And these non-tropical lows and troughs can still become tropical systems given some time over water, even in the month of November. So this area is expected to break away from the front. The front moves off, and then this area slowly wanders back to the west under the influence of the high pressure winds that are starting to guide this away from the front. As this breaks away from the front, it may become more tropical with warmer waters and warmer air above it, and it could become a named storm over the next couple of days. Models show this kind of well. They at least show the potential here. The Hurricane Center, for what it's worth, has this at about 30% chance over the next couple of days, so they're not overly sold on it. They're sold on it enough to go send the hurricane hunters out there. We'll be sending a few planes down to St. Croix, and they'll be flying it tomorrow afternoon and then staging in St. Croix for follow-on flights, so there's enough there to at least send a few planes out, which means there's something there to talk about. GFS model shows this pretty well, shows this inverted trough here to the northwest of Puerto Rico. We can see the trough axis pretty clear on tomorrow morning's model. And the system generally just moves off to the west. The question will be, largely given the proximity to the land and to Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, which are mountainous, kind of rugged terrain islands with a good amount of real estate, will the low develop far enough north or far enough south? The GFS definitely shows some thunderstorm activity increasing and the wave standing more upright, but it does not indicate the wave is going to close off, as in have winds earthbound relative westerlies, or we call westerly winds, basically, where the model would show the storm actually being able to close off a low pressure system and actually become a more organized storm. The question will be, where does that low try to develop? If it develops on the northern end of the wave axis, it might be able to miss land and skate just north of Hispaniola and maybe into the southern Bahamas and just north of Cuba, at least for a couple of days, which could give it that window it needs to try to develop. It also might develop further south and get careened right into land, and then it would probably just be a bunch of rain and nothing really to talk about. So that's something we're going to watch over the next couple of days. This is valid for late Thursday into early Friday. This is valid Friday into Saturday. The GFS tries to close something off near the eastern tip of Cuba late Friday into early Saturday, but it just kind of barely shows it getting it together, and then it shows it moving into land. The rub here would be that even if this doesn't really develop, this is going to still bring a lot of showers and storms to parts of South Florida and the Keys. This is going to be a very high moisture area, and it's also going to have some strong upper winds, or at least some low-level winds, so it's going to be very gusty across Miami and south of Lake Okeechobee and in the Florida Keys through the weekend and even into early next week as this disturbance passes by. But for now, we can't rule out the potential for maybe a low-end tropical storm moving through, a very kind of messy tropical storm. So stay tuned on that one. We'll have more to come as the models develop, and we'll obviously have some better information when the hurricane hunters get out there and see what we're dealing with. So that's kind of the last of the marked things. We also have this area of disturbed weather again back here on the Tropical Tidbit satellite. This big area of disturbed weather is something I'm watching. Kind of interesting area of interest. It's kind of just this broad piece of the monsoon trough. This is all moving slowly off to the west. This is going to be in the vicinity of the Caribbean into early next week. And another thing we're going to have happening is this big cold front coming down. So we're looking at next Saturday here. This system has moved well over into here, and we have a strong high pressure building into the southeast U.S. in the wake of a cold front. We also have a tail end of a stationary boundary that's departing in the form of a non-tropical low. So you have a ridge over the Caribbean, you have a frontal boundary here, and you already have a kind of done disturbance all in the Caribbean over warm water. This is very possible that we'll have another named storm to talk about going into later next week. The good news for the U.S. is, given this front and timing, doesn't look like it's going to be a big deal for y'all. But as I go through and we kind of develop this in the next weekend, we could see something for the islands once again. Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, Southern Bahamas, Puerto Rico, all could have something to talk about. And it looks like, you might have another named storm. And if you're going to have a named storm this late into November, the Southern Caribbean and Central Caribbean is probably where it's going to be. So it would make sense climatologically speaking. But given this setup, this would not look like anything that would pull off towards the Gulf. It looks like it would get shoved away and it would not be a problem. So just something else we're tracking in the next week. It's not a big deal. It's probably not for the U.S., but if you're in the islands or whatever, you know somebody out there, we will be watching it through the week and to come. But this is going to be a long roll. This is something we're going to be talking about for a while. So no big deal tonight, just something else to mention. So that's what I got for you guys on your tropical update. Again, Rafael moves away from the Keys tonight and then just wanders for several days, likely falls apart in the Gulf. Our other area of interest may bring some squally weather to South Florida, but does not appear to be a big problem. And then we're watching another system down the road. So that's what I got for you guys today on your tropical update. As always, thanks for watching and have a good one.